Welcome to the Oregon State Police Ignition Interlock Device Law Enforcement Training video. Ignition interlock devices are proven to help our communities and highways become safer. Your role in this program is just as important as the device itself. Statistics show us that 50 to 75% of drivers with a suspended license will drive anyway, and those with DUIIs are almost 3 times more likely to re-offend. Ignition interlock devices are an effective safeguard for keeping offenders from operating a vehicle while impaired by alcohol, reducing DUII-related collisions. There are thousands of ignition interlock devices installed in Oregon right now. With so many devices on the road, it is imperative law enforcement understand the purpose and functionality of the ignition interlock devices. This video will help clarify areas where we commonly see questions or confusion. Let's take a look at the ignition interlock devices, commonly referred to as an IID. There are several IIDs qualified to use in Oregon. The device will request random breath samples throughout the driving sequence, and the driver has up to 10 minutes to provide a passing breath sample. This helps to ensure the required driver stays compliant throughout the operation of the vehicle. The system also records usage, photographs of who is providing the breath samples, and GPS coordinates at different points during the driving sequence. The data collected by the device is monitored regularly for compliance. Let's discuss basic device requirements. A person will have an IID requirement as part of a DUII diversion agreement, upon a DUII conviction, or as a result of a conviction of crimes outlined in Oregon Revised Statute 813.602. When looking up a driving record, there are 3 basic scenarios you may encounter. The first is when the driver has a current active requirement and the time frame for the requirement has not been exceeded. At the top of the DMV LEDS return, under the license status, you should see IID required yes. Be sure to make note of the IID requirement dates listed on the stop line. This information will be important later for any court appearances that may arise. The second scenario you may encounter is a current active requirement that has exceeded the initial requirement timeframe. The return will reflect IID required yes at the top, and the stop line will have a start date with an end date of all zeros and the word IID required indefinite. This does not mean the driver has a never-ending requirement. This simply means the driver's requirement will continue until a 90-day no negative report is obtained by the DMV. It is important to make note of the requirement dates. This information will be important later for any court appearances that may arise. The final scenario will reflect when the driver had an ignition interlock requirement that has since been satisfied. It is important to look under the driving status. If there is no IID required yes, then the driver does not have an active requirement. The requirement dates will be dated in the past. It is important to know that if you take enforcement action on a driver who has an ignition interlock device requirement and is operating a motor vehicle without one, you should request and obtain a suspension notice for IID requirement from the DMV prior to any court appearance. It is recommended to use this notice in any court proceedings as evidence that the driver was notified of their IID requirement. Much like driving while suspended, it is an affirmative defense that the defendant did not know they were subject to an IID requirement. An IID requirement begins on the last day of the DUII license suspension. As part of a DUII diversion agreement, or for the first DUII conviction, an IID must be installed for 1 year. For a second and subsequent convictions, the requirement for an IID to be installed is 2 years. For any DUII conviction, along with crimes outlined in ORS 813.602, the requirement is 5 years. The IID must be installed when required and cannot be removed from the vehicle until approved by DMV. If the IID is removed without satisfying the driver's requirement first, the DMV may suspend the driving privileges. Those who are convicted of a DUII in Oregon must install an IID in their vehicle in order to receive a hardship permit while their driving privileges are suspended for the DUII. Permissions for the hardship will be outlined on the hardship form. Driving for any other reason is not allowed with a hardship permit. Any commercial driver convicted of DUII may be eligible for a hardship permit, but will be downgraded to a Class C driver license. Hardship permits do not allow for driving of commercial vehicles. An employer-owned vehicle operated by an IID required driver for employment purposes may not have a device installed. This is one of 2 exceptions that allows a required driver to operate a vehicle without an IID installed. An employer ignition interlock device exception form must be signed and in the possession of the driver. A required driver does not qualify for an employer exception if they are self-employed or own the vehicle operated for work purposes. The employer exception does not pertain to the required driver's personal vehicle, therefore they must have an IID installed on their personal vehicle. The other exception a driver may have is a medical exemption. A driver with an IID requirement may request for a medical exemption through the DMV. The required driver must have an IID medical exemption application completed and signed by a healthcare provider. The application gets submitted to the DMV for review. If the DMV accepts the reason or reasons stated on the medical exemption application, the IID required yes under the driver's status will be removed from the driver's record. If you see a suspension or revocation on someone's Oregon driving privileges, in addition to an IID requirement, those are often separate offenses and should result in different enforcement actions. Having an IID installed does not exempt the person's driving suspension or revocation. There are 2 components to look for in the driving compartment: a handheld device with a cord and a camera. During a traffic stop, it's important to check the operability of the device. First, ensure the camera is present, unobscured, and positioned to photograph the driver. Next, check to see the device is wired into the blocker, which is located under the driver's side dashboard. Ignition interlock devices in Oregon are set to have a 2-minute period where the driver is permitted to start the vehicle without providing a breath sample. This is a safety feature in case the vehicle stalls or temporarily breaks down. This allotted time period is referred to as a free restart. You may request the driver to turn the engine off. Then wait more than 2 minutes. Again, it takes at least 2 minutes for the free restart to expire and the IID to reset. The driver must blow into the device to start the vehicle. On the handset, there will be lights or a display, which communicates to the driver as they proceed through the sampling process. Be patient and supportive, as the device may be sensitive to changes in the driver's breathing pattern if they are nervous. A passing sample will be acknowledged with an auditory and visual alert. If the device does not light up or make noise, or if the vehicle starts without a breath sample, the device may have been tampered with, and a follow-up investigation may be appropriate. If the driver provides a breath sample and the vehicle does not start, the sample was either not sufficient or may indicate that the driver is impaired by alcohol and someone else started the vehicle. The device will alert with an auditory and visual warning stating which error occurred. A DUII investigation may be necessary. If the driver provides a breath sample and the vehicle starts, chances are the device has not been tampered with and the driver is not impaired by alcohol. You can then proceed with the initial reason for the traffic stop. Several common issues to keep in mind regarding ignition interlock devices. Even if the driver restarts the vehicle, they could still be impaired. The ignition interlock device only detects alcohol, so impairment from other substances is possible. Investigate suspected impairment as you would for any other DUII traffic stop. Conduct field sobriety tests or a drug evaluation if you think it is appropriate. If you encounter a device that has been circumvented or tampered with, you should document the evidence for additional enforcement. Take pictures of any issues located. Note the name of the IID company located on the device, along with the device serial number. Take enforcement action for the circumvention or tampering of the device, and notify the Oregon State Police Ignition Interlock Device Oversight Program. Do not remove the device or any of its components. If you encounter a driver stopped in an unusual place or alongside the highway, it is possible they have pulled over for a retest. The device requests random retests every 15 to 45 minutes. Although permitted, interlock clients are discouraged from performing the retest while the vehicle is moving. A passing breath sample must be completed within 10 minutes, or the device will record a test violation. Participation in the Ignition Interlock program demands strict compliance in order to satisfy an IID requirement, as well as keep Oregon roads safe. It's possible that you may stop a vehicle with an IID installed, but the driver does not have an Oregon IID requirement. There are several things to consider if this happens. First, the device could be installed for another driver who uses the vehicle. The driver operating the vehicle still has to use the device in order to start the vehicle. There are a small number of devices installed on a voluntary basis for personal reasons. These drivers will not have an IID requirement listed on their driving record. Devices installed for out-of-state drivers may have different regulations and could be satisfying that state's ignition interlock requirement or restriction. In such cases, a camera may not be required or installed. If you have any questions regarding an ignition interlock device or requirements, contact your agency's dispatch center, the Oregon State Police Dispatch Center, or the Ignition Interlock Device Oversight Program. We encourage your questions. Thank you for your commitment in helping the state of Oregon become a leader in the nationwide campaign against impaired driving.